All right, we're live.
Hello, welcome to the Atheist Republic Sunday Hangout. I'm Makisha. We have Armin, Nirav, and Utsav if he can get his microphone working, and whoever else drops in along the way. And I will, right off the bat, acknowledge that my face is smooshed. I don't know what's going on. It's not actually my camera. I didn't have time to restart and figure it out. So I will just be smushed today. Today we're going to talk about Buddhism, and right off the bat we will acknowledge that none of us are very knowledgeable about Buddhism. So we're just going to have a conversation. We'll see where it goes. We tossed out there what your guys' thoughts were on Buddhism. We had a lot of responses. Over 600 people commented. We had quite a lot of you say that you're a Buddhist and atheist, and that seems to be consistent with my experience. And well, let's just go ahead. I'm going to mention one of the first comments we had, which is along the lines of Buddhism not being a religion, but rather a way of life or a philosophy. So let's start off with that. Buddhism, religion or no?
Well, I mean, if you consider religion to be, I think when most people when you say religion, they're thinking one of the three Abrahamic religions. But I think for something to be a religion, it doesn't have to have a God figure in there. As long as you have some dogma, some supernatural elements in there, some practices and traditions and a set of beliefs for people to follow, that makes it a religion. And I think by those standards, Buddhism is a religion. People say Buddhism is not a religion, it's a way of life. Well, religions are also a way of life. Something could be a way of life and a religion at the same time. I don't know. That's my
Yeah, I've even heard Christians say that they're not religious, that their faith is a way of life, or their faith is their life, or so it's. I think that's not something we can really pin down, but Buddhism as a, or maybe even just generally speaking, philosophy versus religion.
Well, the origin of Buddhism comes from again India, and actually the area between India and Nepal, and it's a non-theistic religion. The one thing that might appeal to atheists here is that it does not have any kind of governing or creating deity at all. There is no figure that can redeem you at all. However, everything else in Buddhism seems to be has to have the characteristic of a religion, because they have rituals, they have monks. Your goal, instead of being saved by a prophet or a savior, son of God, is basically to exit the cycle of rebirth. This is something that comes from its Hindu origin also. And another thing that's interesting to note is that in Buddha's lifetime, it actually did not develop into a religion, an organized religion by itself in his lifetime. A lot of this developed like much time after he died, which again kind of draws a bit of similarity with the rise of Christianity, with the rise of Islam. It takes a while before it takes shape, after its founders have gone, and it's left to the loyal lieutenants and students and followers to shape this into something. So it's actually, I think it's a false consolation to say that this might be better than a religion that acknowledges a deity, because it's everything else. I just been doing a little bit of reading up in Buddhism, and apparently it has adopted the Hindu ideas of having demons and having positive deities, which are not gods, but at the same time they are elevated to a level of superheroes. So it's a question mark. You're taking everything except the creator deity idea. And is that enough for it to appeal to atheists? I don't think so.
Utsav, what do you think? Let's see if we can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So, in terms of seeing Buddhism as a religion, yeah, because I don't know if you've heard the news recently, but in Thailand, there was a person prosecuted for disrespecting Gautam Buddha, the founder of the religion. So, in terms of being an organized religion which affects people's lives across countries where it is present, I think yes, it does that, and hence it is a religion. As for saying, in terms of speaking with respect to other religions, it might be a better prospect because Gautam Buddha also stated that you believe only what you see. So in that terms, it is rational in a sense. But it still comes off as a religion because it is the organization within Buddhism is affecting millions of lives as of now.
I think the question of what makes something a religion is really interesting. Sometimes, most of the time, it's very clear cut, but then there are situations like this where, because we've come to think of religion as having a deity, I think, or in particular, then it doesn't quite fit. But by definition, only one of the definitions of a religion includes a deity. There's also a system of rituals, faith, worship, or just something you hold in importance above kind of all other things in your life. So in that respect, I think we're maybe getting a little bit too fine in the details if we try to say that Buddhism isn't a religion. So we have somebody, Surisha joined us just now. We're talking about whether or not Buddhism is a religion, or if that contributes to or it has value in the conversation kind of in the first place. That was one of the first comments we had when we asked what are the thoughts on Buddhism. So what are your, oh, we just lost her. I'm talking to empty space.
So since we lost her, I'm wondering why is it that Buddhism has such an appeal to atheists, anyways, especially atheists in the West. Why is it that they're so when you say anything negative about Buddhism, atheists, a lot of atheists, not all of them, all of a sudden become they want to start defending it and make sure to categorize it not as a religion, and also defend it as a good philosophy. I'm not sure if this is true for most of them, but the ones I've talked to seem not to. When they defended Buddhism, and then I asked them about Buddhism, they didn't seem to even be able to tell you much about Buddhism. So to me, it seemed like there were, and also people that were critical of it were also didn't seem to be able to tell much about it either. And it seems like even a lot of atheists were defending or talking against something that they didn't. I mean, I don't know much about Buddhism, so I can't really judge it. I can't say if it was a good philosophy or bad philosophy. But it's strange to me that so many people have decided if it's a good or bad thing, and it seems like they haven't actually studied it yet before deciding it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with the way it's seen as a cultural thing. You have the most prominent face of Buddhism is, of course, the Dalai Lama, and he's actually someone who is respected by a lot of atheists. And it's got to do with an overall impression of it being something very peaceful, and as well as that, there's a cultural affinity with Southeast Asia, and a feeling of a simple life. I think these themes appeal to atheists, to other parts of atheists, people who want a sense of a message of peace, but they're not getting it from Abrahamic religions, and so they try to experiment with Buddhism before they. And being non-theistic, it gives you kind of a stepping stone into becoming an atheist. Because if the plunge from having a god and then not having a god is too much for you, then this is a good stepping stone.
Is it the case in outside of Europe and North America that is it the same, that atheists sort of embrace Buddhism whereas they might not embrace other religions? I don't know.
You guys had your hands up.
Anybody?
I think Sirisha? Yeah, go on. We can't hear you. Is your microphone on? Okay, we can't hear you.
I have heard people in places like Thailand say that it's not the same, that the way Buddhism is perceived is not the same as the way it's perceived in the West. And I haven't really talked to a lot of people about that, but so I was just wondering if anybody had any insight on that. Sarisha?
Oh.
No mic.
No mic. We could hear you for a second, but then we lost. Let's see what Utsav has to say for now.
I think Buddhism also offers another thing which atheists in the West are very particular about. I think like Sam Harris, he considers himself to be very spiritual even though he's an atheist. And Buddhism very precisely focuses on nirvana, that is spirituality, and how to attain nirvana through the Buddhist way. I think that is what appeals to most atheists in the West. But in East, I think due to the existence of Hinduism, which also drives on the same philosophy about attaining nirvana, I don't think you'll see a lot of Southeast Asians going towards Buddhism because of that, because they already have it in their. I mean, when I say Southeast Asians, I'm particularly referring to Muslims and Hindus. So in terms of Muslims, they're very particular about their religion, so there's obviously no point. But in terms of Hindu atheists, I think they refer to themselves as Hindu atheists specifically because they essentially the endpoint of both the religions is the same, that is attaining nirvana. And when both things offer the same thing, they'd rather associate themselves with Hinduism, which they were born into culturally.
That's a really interesting point because there is definitely much more massively large presence of Buddhism in North America than there is of Hinduism, despite the similarities. And I think that's a really interesting point, that when Hinduism is present, perhaps Buddhism doesn't have as much of an appeal to people who are either leaving religion or not interested in a more monotheistic religion or whatever. Sarisha, I think maybe your mic's working now? Oh, I keep hearing sounds. I guess I'm not hearing you. We're still not getting any sound from you. Sorry.
I just want to add one thing else. I think like there's two groups of atheists when it comes to their opinions about Buddhism. You have people like Sam Harris, which these people have studied Buddhism in great detail, and they have found some valuable information in there with regards to consciousness, and they've just stripped out the supernatural out of it and just started looking at what this philosophy has to say about our consciousness and what we can learn from it. But I think a lot of atheists just like Buddhism because it's non-violent. And to me that's strange, because it seems like because people have associated religion with violence, and now we have such a low standard for what we find as good, as long as you don't kill anybody, all of a sudden you become a good ideology, because we see like we associate all other Abrahamic religions mostly with violence, with killing, with wars. So they are elevating this idea of Buddhism just as a contrast to all these other religions that is actually they're claiming to have cause a lot of problems, and that seems to be the only reason why they are seeing it as something valuable. But I think that, yeah, go on.
I think it's like, when you get Buddhism, because it's very well known that the Buddha said that I'm not founding a religion, don't confuse me with a divine figure, even though he is now seen as divine. I think it's like if you really want to investigate Buddhism, it's like getting a Lego set, and you get to build whatever you want from it. Because if you look at Buddhism in practice, say the Indian Buddhism that exists today is very different from Tibetan Buddhism, which is actually, it's a distinct religion altogether. There's nothing in common except the Buddha being a figure of revelation. If you go to Buddhism in Japan, it's a completely different animal from something you'll find in Thailand. So these are actually different religions. I'm not even sure if we can say Buddhism is one thing, because it's so culturally, and of course they what they do is that they blend local deities, local customs into everything. Locally, they're not non-violent, because there's a degree of corruption in monasteries. There's the problems with ritualism are all there. However, if you're a Westerner or exploring person, and you start off with the Buddha, you get some quotes, you get an idea of this, and you can construct your own kind of Buddhism. There's an American Buddhism, probably is going to be a different religion. So it's unique in that respect. I think you make your own rules in many ways.
Which is something that was brought up in the conversation when we asked to hear people's thoughts about it, is that it's very different depending on where you are, and there is an element of being able to, as you said, just piece together your own kind of thing. It's it lends itself to that, and I think that again makes it a little bit difficult to have a conversation about. But I think what I find most fascinating in our context is the conversation related to why atheists are drawn to those types of things in general. Do you think that some atheists maybe have some sort of natural proclivity toward spirituality, and they find that that's lacking in their life as atheists, and so they're trying to find that, whereas maybe other atheists don't? What are your experiences with that particular thing?
I think if you, I'm not sure actually if this is true, but I suspect that most of the atheists that like Buddhism were used to be a member of a different religion, and they might see this as an alternative rather than just giving it up completely. It seems like a lot of people, some people just like to figure things out on their own, look at life and see like what should they do, like just look at situations and come up with what the solution is on their own. But some people like to have like a rule book or a guide to follow, and it seems like when people are disappointed in religious, their Abrahamic religions, they might look for a substitute, and I think for some people Buddhism is the answer.
Yeah, I think being a stepping stone is a really important aspect in the appeal of Buddhism. The other point is the way that Siddhartha Gautam Buddha, his life is known, is like he began as someone who wanted to find the answer, and so he was in a journey by himself, and he tried several of the prevailing religions and the wisdoms, etc., and it didn't click with him. So the idea of being someone who is on a personal journey to find the truth or find a sense of order in the universe, I think that personal story of the Buddha does appeal to these people. It's not so much that they agree with what he ultimately found, which again is a lot simpler, because as opposed to Jesus, he isn't really claiming anything for himself. He's not the Son of God, but he's found the state of nirvana to be the answer. So it's like, if he can do it, maybe I can too, which has been the appeal of Buddhism for quite a long time.
The thing is that I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is true. So if you know, let me correct me. It seems to me that if you go to not the Western Buddhism, but actually to the original version of Buddhism. And I know even in the East it's very different, but it seems like most of different Buddhist viewpoints have this in common, and that's the idea that this world and the pleasures that it offers, it's something that you should avoid. And to me, as an atheist that doesn't believe in an afterlife, I feel like if somebody believes that, that's a big loss. Basically, if we have one chance at happiness, any pleasure that we're foregoing in this life is a missed opportunity. And it seems like Buddhism, and I'm not saying this is true, so this is what I've heard, and this is what other Buddhists have told me, so if it's misrepresenting it, I'm sorry. But it seems like a lot of Buddhists believe that we have to try and limit the amount of pleasure that we have in this life. So, and to be able to elevate to a higher status, I don't know, in the next life. And that's to me similar to Christians and Muslims sacrificing this life for the next one, which is another good trade.
Yeah,
I think it has more to do with attachments, and then it does like experiencing good things. I think Buddhism cautions against being too attached to our own ego, our own emotions, the positives and the negatives, it cautions against being too attached to those things, not necessarily not experiencing them. I mean, I think there is an ascetic sect of Buddhism, and the monks, I think, are probably called to asceticism, but I don't think asceticism is necessarily inherent in Buddhism, but I'm not positive. That's just my understanding.
Yeah, and all atheists are not materialists. That's the material atheism of enjoying, sensual pleasures and the life in general. A lot of people have genuine escapist feelings. They want to live a simple life, no complications. They don't agree. The Hitchens version of atheism is not. Atheism doesn't demand it anyway. You don't have to be a materialist to be an atheist. And that's if you look at Asian atheism, especially at least from India anyway, it's always been a sense that, well, there's no God, but that doesn't mean you do X, Y, Z. You start splurging or become a materialist. So I think that's a distinction here. There must be many atheists who don't have the desire to be materialist, and that's why Buddhism would be appealing to them.
Well, it's not just the fact. It's not just the fact of being materialistic or not. It's and I think Buddhism does suggest that you don't have to completely forego the pleasures of this world, but it's better that if you do. And this is what I've been told. So it doesn't make that a requirement, but it does teach you that the only way to completely become free of this world and become completely enlightened is to forego any sort of pleasure, sexual pleasure, food, comfort, and that's the only path to enlightenment. I'm not sure if this is how common this belief is, but that's how it was portrayed to me by other Buddhists. So, and I think that's a problem, because I think if somebody chooses to do that, that's fine. But if that doesn't make somebody happy, but is convinced to live like that because of their beliefs, then that would be a problem. And I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just saying I'm just wondering if this is the case. So feel free to disagree.
Let's see if Sarisha has her mic working.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. There we go.
Great. So I was going to say something on the lines that Nirav and Utsav have spoken about this being connected to majorly being related to Hinduism also, because Buddhism and Hinduism are categorized as a way of life in these parts of the world. So yeah, I mean, and Vipassana, I mean, mindful meditation or something like that is basically very famous amongst people. So a lot of people think of Buddhism as being like you have already mentioned, non-violent, peaceful, and promoting equality and everything that you ideally like to mention. But the way that we see it today probably isn't really like the other. I mean, isn't really like what they have mentioned. It's more like other religions and promoting certain sorts of animosity and anxiety amongst our kind of people. Because see, I'm not the. Hello,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
So it has turned into more like other mystical Eastern religions, like Armin had earlier mentioned. We haven't we haven't seen people who have been able to speak critically about Buddhism, just like we have been able to speak about Islam or Christianity or even Hinduism for that matter. So we do not know. I mean, and like you mentioned, Nirav, it's all about enlightenment and attaining peace after that. And the life of Gautam Buddha essentially was fundamental in establishment of his ideologies, and how he found that people couldn't find peace with the materialistic world, in the materialistic world that they are living in. So it's a sort of disconnect from the materialistic world and going into somewhere where you can find peace. So they are essentially selling you a product, just like any other religion is selling you a product. That was my point.
That's a really interesting perspective of essentially selling peace or hawking peace. If you can find not just peace with others, but peace inside your own self through this particular process or whatever, which isn't necessary. I mean, in a way, that's kind of what a lot of philosophies are, a lot of self-help stuff. There's a lot of things that Oprah's book list. I mean, there's a lot of things that people utilize to do that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Another thing you mentioned is that I thought was interesting is the confluence between religion or philosophy and a culture, and how that can be both positive in the sense that sometimes, well, positive maybe for atheists or secularism, in the sense that it can kind of dilute a lot of times.
Hear you anymore, Makisha?
Sorry.
I can hear her fine.
Oh, then maybe it's just me.
Okay.
I'm going to keep talking just so I can finish my thought. Maybe it'll get recorded. So it's just the confluence of religion and culture. And Armin, you can repeat what I'm saying if everybody else can hear you when I'm done. Whereas it can dilute the religion, but it can also exacerbate it in some cases and make it actually be so entwined with culture that people consider it part of their cultural identity and something they need to protect.
No, that was great. I could hear you fine. I think Nirav's speakers has a problem, but that's a very good point. The one thing I want to add is, it seems like Buddhism is more of a cultural thing than a religious thing, but for a lot of people. But that doesn't mean that it can't get mixed into politics, just like other religions. Buddhism has a huge impacts on politics when it comes to its relationship between Tibet and China, when it comes to the relationship between Muslims and Buddhists in Myanmar, and you also have some Buddhist militia. So what do you think about that? Do you think that just like other, maybe to a lesser extent, it could actually mobilize people into creating fighting forces and also into getting mixed with politics? Or or do you think those elements are completely separate from Buddhist teachings, and it happened regardless of the teachings of Buddhism?
I think a lot of things have happened regardless of the teachings of Buddhism, because like we discussed earlier, it has become distinct in each country that deals with Buddhism. It has become a distinct kind of religion. And there's one point I want to emphasize, which I should have mentioned it even when we were talking about Hinduism the week before, is that in the East, the culture and the religion, there's not a distinct line there. A lot, it's all entirely mixed up. There's no sense that the religion is actually different from your culture, which again, of course, makes it difficult to criticize. But this is how the Eastern mind, and these are called dharmic religions, in that they focus more on the role of the person who is adhering to these teachings, rather than the entire emphasizing any of the creation myths as much. Coming back to your question about politics, is that, well, we are seeing this happen in Sri Lanka and in Myanmar. What's happening there is that there's a conflict with the Muslim communities there. And Buddhism is being used in the same type of language that I've observed is being used by Hindu nationalists in India. And a lot of this is also kind of tactics are being borrowed from the Christian fundamentalists. And so what is this? This is fusing into something like a religious and a theocratic nationalism, in that they call themselves a Buddhist nation, and they say, well, we have to defend the Buddhist identity, and it's under threat because historically some of the Muslims have engaged in jihad and separatism. So they use this ethos, this manufactured ethos of saying that we are a Buddhist country, in order to instigate people towards violence, even though it's the most, Gautam Buddha himself would have been appalled. So you're looking at something that's extremely different religion than what it was originally meant to be. I want to give you a couple of examples of modern developments in Buddhism. One is ancient. When Buddhism originated in India, it actually, for a while, historians believed that it became the majority religion of India. And then suddenly, it kind of disappeared, and Hinduism became number one again. What you observe is that Hinduism absorbed ahimsa, the teaching of nonviolence. It absorbed a lot of the teaching about nirvana were absorbed at that time. Buddha is regarded as the 10th avatar of Vishnu, so he's officially becoming a god in Hinduism. And all of these things were kind of reabsorbed into Hinduism at the time. Now jump to the middle of the 20th century, and Dr. Ambedkar, who was a anti-caste activist and also distinguished politician, etc. He did something that was turned Buddhism into a rebellion against the caste system, because he encouraged all the quote-unquote low caste, untouchable people to convert to Buddhism and use it against Hinduism to break down and terminate the caste system. Hasn't worked so well. But you're seeing how people are changing the definition of Buddhism, using Buddhism for political purposes, for community purposes, and for social reform. So it is metamorphizing everywhere it goes. It's become something totally different, and in fact, in many ways, totally different from what even Gautam Buddha intended.
Do we know that he was actually a historical figure, or is that actually just something that we can't answer at this point?
He was again. This comes to 2,000-3,000 years ago, but he was a prince of a small state on the border between India and Nepal, and he renounced that life. Now, most people believe that there actually was a Siddhartha Gautam. However, I think a lot of details about his life basically just cannot be verified. They are in that fog of history.
Exactly. There is no there is no scripture per se. There are no written documents about his teachings or preachings that essentially talk about it. So far as I know, just as there are in other religions, you have indoctrinated documents wherein there is a certain man who talks about what is moral, what is not, what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, and how God punishes you for your sins, etc., etc. But so far as I know, there are no written documents or written records of his teachings. So this makes it a little difficult to verify whether this evolved as another religion, whether he was really interested in having a line of followers, just like say Muhammad had, or so. There, like I would like to agree with you on the same point. There are no written documents.
I don't think the existence of him as a person is in question, though. It's just, is that what you were asking, Armin? He existed. It just.
Well, I'm not saying that's important, but it's just interesting. No, I mean,
but that's what you were asking. Like,
yeah. That's what I was asking, and I
don't think that's ever been in question if he actually existed.
It has been actually.
Well, as an actual person, that a person with that name existed.
Yeah.
I thought it was like a part of the royal family. I thought we had a history of the actual like lineage or whatever.
Well, the lecture that I listened to, the professor made it seem as if that we don't even know exactly. Like, he made it seem as if this is the most common belief, but there's no way to verify it.
Oh, I've never heard anybody question his existence. That's interesting.
It's just interesting. I mean, I don't think it's important because nobody really cares that much about the fact that if he really existed or not. But I think it's interesting because you know, there's a lot of times we assume somebody existed, but people can't even prove 100% that Socrates existed, right? So because there's no verifiable evidence, right? There are some historical figures that we have verifiable evidence that they existed, but there's some other historical figures that there is no way to completely show that they actually existed, right? Like, it's easy to prove that Alexander existed because some people from one city said that he's leaving at that point at this date, and the other people at a different city documented that he arrived at this city at this date. There's no way for these people to have communicated with each other beforehand and made this happen, so obviously he left there and he arrived there at that certain time, so that's proof that he existed. But for some other historical figures that had smaller lives and didn't write anything themselves, then they could have been just made up.
Yeah, this comes from a period. You have to remember one thing. This comes from a period of time when religions were orally transmitted. Really, religious ideas and philosophies, etc., were done by oral transmission. Folk tales, mythology, all of this comes from an oral tradition. Also, in the time that Buddha is supposed to have lived, there were many such wandering monastic orders, wandering monks, and spiritual figures. They were very admired in India. So people would always have some kind of a sect following of a certain leader. And it seems to be that Gautam Buddha was one of in the same way, a wandering ascetic, and he was then either through something original that he preached, which actually there's the lines of originality. I mean, there's a lot of renunciation talk in Hinduism anyway. So when exactly did he become the trigger for something new? I'm not sure. Nobody is really, but that I think is instructive. This is the kind of time that he was supposed to have lived in. So it's very easy to see that it's possible that it's all built on a layer of myth. And unfortunately, historical research in the Indian subcontinent is very politicized. So I'm not even sure if later on we'll have an opportunity to do an objective research. And unlike the Israelis who came out and said the entire the story of Moses and the Exodus is all incorrect, I'm not sure they will ever get to that point with this anything coming from the Indian subcontinent, because that will be explosive.
Well, it seems like Buddhism and Hinduism are similar in the sense that there's nothing that you could point to and say, like, this is the teachings of Buddhism, or like this is the teachings of Hinduism. It's so diverse around the world that there is no set of beliefs that you could label as Hinduism or Buddhism. And it seems like these two religions have that in common. But when we discussed Hinduism, there seemed to be that there were at least some beliefs within the religion, at least some sects of some parts of India that were problematic. For example, the caste system or arranged marriage. I don't know if that's part of Hinduism or it's just that part of culture. Um, but is there anything that you guys know that within Buddhist teachings that you would consider problematic, or is there like, or do you think that there's nothing that has been labeled as a Buddhistic teaching that anybody could object to in any way?
It is just a story. So far as I know, it's just a story of a prince who wandered off into the lands, just as someone was mentioning earlier. And because he lived inside the palace in all comforts, he never knew about the kind of misery that goes on in the outside world. And when he came face to face with the poverty, misery of the people around, he decided to renounce everything and go wandering and, apparently attained enlightenment. This is what we know of Buddha's story as. So besides this, we do not know of any of his teachings per se. And people like Sam Harris, who have been sort of making videos on Buddhism, they also talk about rationality and argument, and this is what mainly draws atheists into Buddhism. So one of my friends who has recently told me about Sam Harris videos and why he is fascinated by Buddhism also mentioned the same thing to me. So I do not know of any particular set of preachings or teachings of Buddha that people talk about.
Is Buddhism becoming more popular in India?
Hinduism is more popular in India. So far as I know, Hinduism
is Buddhism gaining popularity? Does anybody know?
Yeah, Buddhism is being used by certain communities as a kind of a political / social reforming tool, in which if you want to get rid of the caste system, now this appeals mainly to people who have been trapped in the lower castes, that if you convert to Buddhism, you are renouncing the caste identity, you're getting out of the whole matrix. And it has kind of become a politicized Buddhism that is being promoted. The progress rate is very low compared to India's population. I think they're just barely 1%. That's still, somewhere as opposed to the 0.1% they were 50 years ago. But then again, here's the important part. It's very easy. It's happened historically. Hindus can absorb the Buddhist the teachings without having to renounce the Hindu identity. And that's what most of them who are not motivated by the caste debate, most of them say, well, I can adopt ahimsa, I can adopt, I can stop eating meat, I can meditate, I can renounce material pleasures. All of this can be done within the ages of Hinduism because Buddha already is an avatar of Vishnu. And so the entire flexibility of Hinduism allows it to absorb anything that, in terms of a specific, distinct Buddhist development is eventually absorbed into Hinduism. That is what has been observed over time. And what I feel is that the West and people from the outside basically have to change the way that they look at Eastern religions. Otherwise, you'll always have this as a confusion. There isn't a straight-cut definition, nor do Indians and Asian people in general demand that of themselves, which is why if you say, well, let's talk about Hinduism, you'll end up talking about some things that are actually Buddhist ideas, like ahimsa, not original to Hinduism, but it's been absorbed inside. And so this is actually an entirely different way of thinking. It's a non-linear way of looking at religion and culture, again, which I said are really intermixed.
Yeah, which is difficult for many of us in the West, that non-linear thing. My understanding is that for something that Buddhism basically has the Four Noble Truths, and kind of beyond that, it just depends. But again, that's everybody's understanding seems to be dependent on who they happen to talk to over the course of their life. So
I wanted to, on Armin's point about what is something about Buddhism that is a problem. as it is, it's like it's an internal thing, but it doesn't create problems for other people, which it doesn't do holy war necessarily, and so the violent problems aren't there, and these are things that you have to resolve for yourself. But the approach of Buddhism is kind of having a contempt for general life, in that you have to renounce material pleasure, you have to renounce sex, you have to renounce wealth, and these things are not practical. And again, they are kind of negating of the living experience. Like, this is all a part of life. It's a healthy part of life also. You have to keep it in balance. Don't overindulge in all that. But then again, it's your business, and you can live a healthy, normal life without. But the escapism in Buddhism, it's derogatory approach towards life in general, that you have to get out of the cycle of rebirth. It treats life around you as being contemptuous, and that is something that is nihilistic. Nietzsche criticized it as being nihilistic in attitude. I don't think it's that negative, but then again, the teachings of Buddha was that it's not worth living on earth. And so just about anything and everything can become a problem in that respect. It is certainly misogynistic in its way, because it treats women as being sort of the only thing that they're good for is, like, inciting senses of men. That's a misogynist way of even talking about women in general. Monks aren't treated as equals in Buddhism. So there's a general contempt towards women. There's a contempt towards society in general. And that's a huge, I mean, if you take Buddhism very seriously, that's a problem. But then again, it ends up being your problem. If you want to go away in a forest and live on your own, nobody's really going to think that's a problem for any rest of society.
Utsav, did you have any, since I think your microphone is back, maybe? Let's test it. Are you talking?
Yeah,
No.
Can't hear him.
Oh, shoot. I thought maybe we had you back. Utsav, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. There's been a couple of times that people have mentioned sexism and misogyny and the way women are treated within religion in a couple of our conversations, and I want to actually pull that out as a separate topic, because I think gender in religion, or women in particular, but gender and the way there's different genders are treated within the context of religion, I think would be a really good topic. I wanted to talk about that with Hinduism as well, but I decided not to bring it up because I want to pull that out, I think, as a separate day or two, because it's such a big, important component to religion, and something atheism has at least skirted a little bit, or not. We can talk about that as well. So we've got about 10 minutes. Any thoughts or comments or questions? Maybe one more that we can discuss.
I just want to talk about the fact that I'll be quick, and then I will let other people speak. But you brought up Sam Harris, and I think, like, if Buddhism has anything to offer, I think people like Sam Harris, and slowly in the future more people from a science background, could actually extract the good parts of whatever it has to offer out of it, and just wash out all the nonsense and look at, I mean, I think if anybody is interested in whatever benefit Buddhism has, I would say, I think, I'm not, again, I'm not saying this is true because I have no idea, but wouldn't it be fair to say that picking up Sam Harris's book, Waking Up, would be a better idea than going and practicing Buddhism? It seems like somebody like Sam Harris, that has studied this in great detail and looked at it in a more scientific way, have managed to just look at the benefit, and without having to adhere to anything such as rebirth or other, reincarnation, or talking about pleasure as a dirty thing. It seems that what Buddhism really offers is that you become mindful of your own consciousness, and that's one of its core benefits, and that's something that people like Sam Harris, and hopefully in the news and more psychologists and other people will look at it in a much more scientific way and will be able to offer us the same benefits in a much more effective fashion.
Well, I actually don't think it's got a lot to do with the science question, because it's what you're seeing here is all of these are moved by emotional needs, and I think Sam Harris is observing certain ideas, which is fine, that this is a thought process that Buddhism has. But ultimately, even in the question of consciousness, Buddhism wants you to merge your consciousness with and destroy your self-consciousness and go into a state of nirvana and leave rebirth. So it negates the whole becoming self-aware itself. Go ahead, Usa. Go ahead.
No, I can't hear.
Oh.
I wonder how much of that has to do with community, like people's desire or need for community involvement, connection with other like-minded people. I think it makes a lot of sense, Armin, what you said, but that's very difficult to sort of, I don't know, congeal into something that people can join and become a community around. And I think some people, especially those who leave religion and feel a very tight sense of community involvement, find that that's lacking and really miss that component. And I wonder how many people become Buddhist or whatever, join Buddhist communities because it's about as close as they can get to something that's just secular, nice, feel good or whatever, but also be part of a community. I'm not sure, but that would be my guess based on conversations I've had with other people. We still really have this strong emotional need to bond with like-minded people, and a lot of atheists have said, who I've talked to personally, that they really are having a hard time finding that, and that a lot of atheists they hang around with, it's very contemptuous. It's a lot of argumenting and thinking about, just talking about philosophy and stuff they just aren't interested in. They want rituals and things that make them feel good.
Yeah,
Suresh, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I personally feel that any religion, for that matter, when they give a set of ideas to follow, for instance, if they're selling, being an ascetic is the highest form of life and renouncing everything is the highest form of life, that's not the right thing to do. You do not suppress the questioning attitude, the sense of reasoning in people. You need to give people the right kind of ideas and then let them decide what is right for them. And selling something like being and renouncing everything, which is also very predominant in Hinduism, is not really the right thing to do. I mean, being a student of science, I have a terrible problem with people suppressing my curiosity or my instinct of questioning. And religions inherently have this idea of enslaving people with their ideologies, whatever they are. I mean, it might not be violence, because peace is the most important thing we require in the world, but there are other things also. I mean, personally, you need to have a sense of, you're a rational human being. You need to have a sense of concern for the other beings around you. So I do not know how far religions go on, serving this purpose of questioning.
There's also an interesting twist there, because I think he said it based on something similar that Gautam Buddha said. Dalai Lama recently said that if science and Buddhism clash, then Buddhism will have to change. If there's evidence that some Buddhist faith is wrong, then it will have to change. And that's like, that makes it so much more appealing for atheists, for rational-minded people. It takes away I mean, you can look at it you can think that maybe there's something deceptive here. He's trying to protect the religion that he represents, etc. Which may be fair criticism. But you can look here that he's trying to make it a lot more fluid, individualistic, and so you write your own rules type of thing. And what this ensures is that Buddhism will evolve with time. It's not just going to disappear. That's what I think he's driving at really with that. But it allows for the merger of the rational with a continuing emotional, communal, superstitious, feeling.
Any other last thoughts or comments? I was looking at the Facebook group to see if there was anything particularly interesting.
What are we discussing next week? Do you know?
Yes, I do know. I'm pulling up my calendar. I was hoping my calendar would pull up like in that time and I could sound like I was really on the ball.
Your screen is all black. Oh no, you're back. Okay.
Yeah, it's getting kind of jittery in my end too. I think I slowed down for a second there. All right, let me look at that. Stay.
Okay. All right. So
yeah. So next time we're actually talking about parenting and kids. That's our next one.
Awesome.
So atheist parents raising kids within religion and all problems with that. All kinds of. I think that'll be a good one. Hopefully, that is assuming that I can get some of our parenting writers to join us. I had already talked to somebody, but I have to double check on that. And then after that, it's paganism, and we do have a special guest who is involved in paganism for that one. So join us next week, as with every Sunday, for the Atheist Republic Hangout, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And thanks, guys, for joining us today. As with always, you can stay and hang out, but I'll be leaving. Yes, Armin?
No, I was just saying I'm going to end the broadcast, but stick around if you want to discuss more.
Yeah, we're going to go off live, but whoever is here can hang out, and anybody who might have been listening because they joined late but wants to join in the conversation, you're welcome to join in. There's plenty of space. Have a great week, everybody.
All right, bye.